The clip went live at 2:14 a.m. No warning, no caption, no dramatic title, just a shaky thumbnail and a description that read, simply, "We've stayed quiet long enough." And within minutes, it was gone. But not before enough people saw it to know this wasn't gossip, wasn't parody, and definitely wasn't polished. This wasn't a documentary. This was a family living room in Georgia. Dim light, old furniture, a phone propped up on a stack of books, and three people sitting too close together, like they were bracing for impact. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. So let me ask you something, and really sit with it. What if the most dangerous secret of Meghan Markle's past didn't come from Buckingham Palace, didn't come from Hollywood, didn't come from a disgruntled aide or a tabloid insider, but from a quiet family who never expected the world to hear their voices at all? Because that's exactly what this clip feels like. There's no intro music, no edits, no branding, just a woman taking a breath she doesn't quite finish and saying, "We were told this would never come back." That sentence alone sent chills through people who watched it before it disappeared. Not because of what it claims, but because of how it's said. This family isn't selling anything. They don't ask for donations. They don't promote a channel. Comments were turned off. And according to archived versions, the video description was edited twice before it vanished completely. Why would someone do that, unless they were terrified of saying too much? According to the family, what they're about to reveal isn't new to them. It's something they've lived with for decades. Something discussed in whispers. Something they were encouraged, strongly, to forget ever happened. A secret pregnancy. A baby born quietly. And a private, under-the-table arrangement that ensured that child would never be connected to Meghan Markle's name. Now listen carefully. These are allegations. Claims. We are not declaring facts. But what makes this story different and unsettling is how specific the family is and how restrained they seem while saying it. They don't accuse. They don't shout. They don't dramatize. They hesitate. They pause. At one point, the man on the couch reaches toward the phone as if to stop the recording, then pulls his hand back. That moment alone has been replayed thousands of times. Because people don't hesitate like that when they're lying for attention. They hesitate when they're afraid of consequences. The family claims Meghan was in her early 20s. Not famous. Not royal adjacent. Just another ambitious young woman trying to build a future. They say the pregnancy was known only to a small circle. And that when the baby was born, arrangements were made swiftly and quietly. No public records. No official adoption trail anyone can easily follow. Just a wealthy family. A private agreement. And silence. What makes this explode now, why this matters now, is timing. This clip didn't surface during Meghan's rise. It didn't surface during her wedding. It didn't surface during the height of royal drama. It surfaced now. At a moment when public trust is already fractured, when inconsistencies are being re-examined, and when people once loyal are no longer protecting the same secrets. And here's the most unsettling part. The family never names the child. They never show a full document. They never give enough to make this story easy. Instead, they show fragments. A photo corner. A date. A partial form. And then they stop. Which raises the question no one can ignore. If this is fake, why risk everything with pieces that can be verified? And if it's real, who helped make sure the rest disappeared? Because as the clip ends, the woman leans forward, lowers her voice, and says something that didn't make it into the reposts, something only a handful of viewers caught before the video was removed again. She says, "That wasn't even the recording we were warned about." And that's where things truly begin. The first thing people noticed wasn't what the family said. It was what they didn't. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't say their last name. They didn't even say where in Georgia they lived. No establishing story. No, here's who we are. Just three people sitting in silence for several seconds longer than what feels comfortable on camera. That silence matters. Because silence is what this family says they were paid for. According to the clip, this wasn't a decision made lightly. One family member admits they argued about posting it for months. Another says they were advised not to. And then there's a line that hits harder than anything else in the video. "We were told reopening this would hurt people who had nothing to do with the choice." That's a strange thing to say if you're inventing a story. The family claims they were never close to Meghan. Not friends. Not relatives. Not insiders. Just people who, through circumstance, were present at a moment that was supposed to vanish forever. A moment that involved paperwork, private conversations, and a baby who was never meant to be traced back. What makes viewers uneasy is how ordinary they seem. No rehearsed outrage. No villain monologues. Just confusion, regret, and visible fear. At one point, the woman stares at the floor and says, "I don't even know if we're allowed to say this part." Allowed by who? That's the question that set comment sections on fire before they were shut down. They describe a period where Meghan allegedly disappeared from her usual circles. Not long enough to raise alarms. Long enough to be explained away as travel, work, or personal matters. The family insists that during this time, conversations were happening behind closed doors. Conversations that weren't emotional, but logistical. That word comes up more than once. Logistical. As if this wasn't a personal crisis, but a problem to be solved. Then comes the moment that made people screen record the clip in a panic. The man reaches behind him and pulls out a thin envelope. Not sealed. Worn at the edges. He doesn't open it. He doesn't read from it. He just holds it up long enough for viewers to see handwriting on the front. Handwriting that looks old, deliberate, and careful. He says, "This is all we were told to keep." Not proof. Not closure. Just something to remind them to stay quiet. The family claims they never knew where the baby went at first. Only later were they told it was a wealthy couple. Private adoption. No publicity. No trail anyone could casually follow. They emphasize that they were not part of any transaction, just witnesses to the aftermath. That distinction matters. They're careful to say it. And then comes the moment people can't stop replaying. The woman pulls out what looks like a photograph. Only part of it is visible. A corner. A date written in pen. She starts to lift it higher, then stops. She looks directly at the camera and says, "This is where we were told to stop." Why show it at all then? That's what makes this unsettling. Liars usually overshare. They dump everything to overwhelm skepticism. This family does the opposite. They ration information. They pull back when it gets dangerous. And that restraint is what makes people lean closer instead of clicking away. One family member says something almost casually. And it's the line that changes the tone of the entire video. "We assumed the agreement meant nobody would ever come asking questions." Agreement. Not rumor. Not understanding. Agreement. The clip ends abruptly after that sentence, as if someone stood up and hit stop without warning. No goodbye. No sign-off. Just a frozen frame of three people sitting there, realizing they've said too much. Within hours, the video was taken down, then re-uploaded, then taken down again. Accounts sharing it were flagged. Links stopped working. And suddenly, people weren't asking whether the story was true anymore. They were asking why someone was working so hard to make sure nobody could decide for themselves. Because buried in the metadata of the first upload, something only a few tech-savvy viewers caught, was a file name that didn't match the video. It suggested this was not the first recording. And according to one line whispered just before the clip cut out, there was another video they were warned never to release. What shifted public reaction from curiosity to unease was not the accusation itself. It was the timeline. According to the family, this wasn't a vague, sometime in the past situation. They described dates, seasons, a very specific window of time when Meghan's life, according to them, briefly stopped moving forward and then resumed as if nothing had happened. They say she was in her early 20s. Old enough to understand consequences. Young enough to believe problems could still be erased instead of confronted. At that point, she wasn't a household name. No palace. No global spotlight. Just ambition, momentum, and a future that couldn't afford complications. The family claims the pregnancy wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No chaos. Just urgency. They use the same word again. Logistical. They describe conversations that weren't about emotions, but about timing. Who would know? Who wouldn't? What could be explained? What couldn't? According to them, the pregnancy wasn't denied, it was managed. And that distinction is what unsettles people. Because managing something means planning its disappearance. The family insists the baby was born quietly. No announcement. No celebration. No hospital trail anyone could casually follow. They claim that within weeks, arrangements were already in motion, not informal favors, but something structured enough to be referred to repeatedly as an agreement. Not adoption, at least not in the way most people understand it. An agreement. They say they were told the child would go to a wealthy family. A couple with resources, privacy, and influence. People who didn't need paperwork to feel secure and didn't want attention under any circumstances. According to the clip, the priority wasn't legality or transparency. It was silence. At one point, the man in the video says something that feels almost rehearsed, like a phrase he's repeated to himself for years. We were assured this was the cleanest solution. Clean. That word hit viewers hard, because nothing about a hidden pregnancy or a vanished child is clean, but it is efficient. And efficiency is what this story keeps circling back to. The family claims they were never given full documents. Only fragments. Only enough information to understand what was happening. Not enough to trace it later. They say names were withheld intentionally. That dates were shown but not explained. That signatures existed but were never left in their possession. Which raises the question, why give them anything at all? And this is where the story takes a darker turn. The woman in the clip says something quietly, almost as if she doesn't realize she's revealing more than she should. She says, they told us holding on to even pieces was protection. Protection from what? From being accused later of lying? Or from being erased if they ever spoke? The family claims they believed the agreement meant permanence. That everyone involved would move on. That the child would grow up protected, provided for, and disconnected from a past that could complicate everything. They insist they never expected history to circle back. But time has a way of doing that. What viewers find chilling is what the family does not claim. They don't say the child wants contact. They don't say the child knows. They don't say they're seeking reunions, money, or recognition. They say something much simpler and much more dangerous. They say they're speaking now because they were warned that someone else was preparing to tell the story first, and they didn't want it twisted. That single sentence changes everything, because it suggests this isn't a lone family breaking silence. It's a race, a countdown. Multiple people holding pieces of the same buried truth, all realizing at the same time that silence no longer guarantees safety. Near the end of the clip, just before it cuts, the man glances off camera and asks, "Do we mention the photo?" The room goes still. The woman shakes her head, and that's when the camera abruptly stops recording. But according to viewers who froze the final frame, there is something visible behind them, partially reflected in a glass cabinet. A photograph standing upright. Not a baby picture. Not a hospital image. Something older. Something that doesn't match the timeline they just described. And if that photo is what some believe it is, then this story isn't about a secret that stayed buried. It's about a secret that's already been seen. So we come back to the question we started with. What if the past you thought you buried didn't stay buried? Not because someone wanted revenge, not because someone wanted money, but because time has a way of loosening even the tightest silence? Because here's what lingers after the clip fades to black. Not certainty, not proof beyond question, but discomfort. Discomfort that doesn't come from spectacle, but from restraint. From people who seem less interested in being believed than in being finished with holding something they never asked to carry. If this story were pure fiction, it would be loud. It would be aggressive. It would name names, show everything, demand attention. Instead, what unsettles people is how careful it is. How many times the family stops themselves. How often they choose not to show something. That's not how viral lies usually behave. And yet, this is still a story made of claims. And claims alone do not equal truth. No court has ruled. No official record has surfaced publicly. No verification has been completed. That matters. It has to matter. But so does context. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a moment where credibility is already fragile, where narratives once accepted without question are being re-examined, and where people who stayed silent for years are deciding that silence no longer protects anyone. If the allegations are false, they will collapse under scrutiny. If they're incomplete, more voices will emerge. And if they're true, even partially, then the most revealing part of this story won't be the pregnancy claim, or the adoption claim, or the documents, or the photos. It will be how many people knew, and how long it took before someone finally said, enough. Because secrets don't vanish. They wait. They move. They change hands. And eventually, they surface. Not always with answers, but with questions sharp enough to cut through decades of carefully managed silence. The Georgia family didn't ask the world to decide what's true. They asked the world to look, to notice what's missing, to question why fragments exist at all, to ask who benefits most from everyone else forgetting. And now the question isn't whether Meghan Markle responds. The question is whether this is the only family who decided they're done being quiet. Because if silence was the agreement, someone just broke it. If you're watching this, don't rush to judgment. But don't look away either. Pay attention to what comes next, to who speaks, to who doesn't, and to how quickly stories disappear when they get too close to something that was never supposed to be found. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what unfolds. Share this if you believe unanswered questions deserve daylight. And remember, some truths don't explode. They leak. And once they do, there's no putting them back.